All right, everyone, guess what? 3 weeks until the end of the school year. Now, I know what's happening. You can hear the sound of summer. Summer is calling you and it's saying, drop the schoolwork. Just come to me. Come to me. I'm summer. Ignore the siren call of summer. Be like Odysseus. Tie yourself to the mast and power on through. Okay? By the way, that's Greek mythology. Point is, let's finish the year strong. You can read about Odysseus and the sirens and tying himself to the mast. You can read about that another day. Finish strong, finish the year strong, and then you can enjoy summer properly. All right? Now, today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the government of Australia. Now, before we go any further, if you have not done the vocabulary quiz or you have not taken the Australian map test, stop this video, go ahead, do those first. If you've already done those, then let's continue. Now, with the government of Australia, it's important for us to understand the capital, Canberra. Now, if you look here, you see this little place, the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory? If you're asking yourself, wait, we never learned about the Australian Capital Territory. That's correct, but you did learn about the capital, Canberra, that is inside the Australian Capital Territory. Canberra is the capital of all of Australia. So that's where the government, the central government of Australia is going to be located. It's in this territory because you don't want one state, New South Wales, to have control over the central government of the entire country. It's kind of the same way that Washington, D.C. is not a part of any state, but it's its own territory, it's its own district. That way, no one state here in the U.S. has power over Washington, D.C. In the same way, even though Canberra is within New South Wales, because the land that it is on is the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, it has control over itself and is not under the control of New South Wales, which is a very good thing. As I said before, you don't want one state being able to control the central government. That never ends well. All right, now with this map right here, notice that Canberra, again in the ACT, it's between two capital cities. Can you tell me what two capital cities it's located between? Now, if you're going to say, oh, it's between Sydney and Adelaide. It is, but no offense to my people in Adelaide, Adelaide's not that powerful a city. So we're not going to say Sydney and Adelaide, we're going to go for the other pair. What's the other pair of cities that Canberra is between? Now, if you're saying, oh, Sydney and Melbourne, correct. Sydney is the largest city by population in Australia. Melbourne is the second largest city in terms of population. Sydney is the number one, it has the number one economy for any city in Australia. Melbourne has the number 2 economy for any city in Australia. Even though there are some estimates that maybe in the next decade and a half, Melbourne might overtake Sydney. The point is, these two are the most powerful cities. So I'm talking about Sydney and Melbourne, are the two most powerful cities in Australia. They're also rivals with each other. So if you're thinking of where to put a capital, if you put a capital in Sydney, if you make Sydney the capital, that's going to tick off all the people in Melbourne. If you make Melbourne the capital, that's going to tick off all the people in Sydney. So it's a lot easier to put the capital between the two. Also, in the Australian Constitution, it does say that the capital has to be at least 100 miles from Sydney. That way, Sydney wouldn't have power over the capital. So, with two rivals, with people in Australia not wanting to give too much power to Sydney or Melbourne, or tick off people in Sydney or Melbourne, that's why Canberra is in the middle. Now, Canberra, what's the point of Canberra? Well, again, since it is the central government, since it's the capital of Australia, that means that the government of Australia, the central government, is going to be located in Canberra. So that means you're talking about the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is a member of Parliament, so Parliament's going to be there. Supreme Court's going to be in Canberra. This is the seat of government for Australia. Now let's take a look at Australia in a little bit of detail. So Australia is a parliamentary democracy. Now remember what a parliamentary democracy is. A parliamentary democracy is where the people, we know democracy means rule by the people. And we know that the people rule through voting. But in a parliamentary democracy, people vote for the, hopefully everyone at home is saying, the party, because that's correct. People vote for the political party, not the person. The Prime Minister of Australia is Scott Morrison. So since it's a parliamentary democracy, that Scott Morrison, his political party, whatever political party he belongs to, we'll talk about that a little bit later, whatever political party he belongs to, won the last election. And since he's the leader of that party, therefore he becomes Prime Minister. Right? So remember, keep that in mind. So again, Australia is a parliamentary democracy. Scott Morrison is the Prime Minister. The last elections in Australia were in 2019, and Scott Morrison's party was expected to lose, but in an upset, they ended up winning, and so he again becomes Prime Minister. So this is his second term, you could say, as Prime Minister. All right, Australia's parliament is made up of two houses. The houses are called the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, if you're sitting there going, wait a second, isn't that the name of our two houses in the United States? Absolutely. So the two houses of our legislature are also called the House of Representatives and the Senate. Also, another similarity that these two have is that for a bill to become law, it has to pass through both houses. Same with us. Now remember though, there is a difference. Australia is a parliamentary democracy, so the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, he is in the lower house, the House of Representatives. House of Representatives has a little bit more power. He's a member of that house. Because remember, a Prime Minister is head of both the executive branch and the legislative branch. So, Scott Morrison is in the House of Representatives. It's a parliamentary democracy. We understand how parliaments work, but they do have a few similarities to what we see here in the U.S. because a bill has to pass through both houses. And if you want to think about that for a contrast, remember how when we did the United Kingdom, you have the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but we said, who really cares if the House of Lords doesn't like a bill? It just has to pass the House of Commons. Well, in Australia, a bill has to pass through both houses to become law. All right, major political parties. The major political parties in Australia are the Labor Party, the National Party, and the Liberal Party. Now, a couple of things. This is what I always tell my students, and you guys, I'm going to tell you the exact same thing. Words that mean one thing in the United States may mean something totally different in another country. So for instance, we're going down to the third, Liberal Party. In the US, if you said, that party's pretty liberal, what you mean is they're to the left side politically. So that would be more like the Democrats here in the US. But liberal in Australia, that's actually center-right. Kind of like you learn in high school classical liberalism. So it's kind of like the word liberal, what it used to mean. So it's more center-right, so like the Republicans here in the U.S. So liberal would mean Democrats, left side of politics here in the U.S. But liberal in Australia, it's right side. The Labor Party, pretty much if you ever hear the word labor in politics, we're talking about the name of a party being the Labor Party, it's always to the left. All right, so it's always going to be to the left, so that's going to be kind of like the Democrats. So the Labor would be kind of like the Democrats here in the U.S. The Liberal Party in Australia would be kind of like the Republicans. You have the National Party in the middle. The National Party is a party that's kind of focused on one major issue, and that's immigration. That is their major focus. All right, so nationalism, putting Australia for, I shouldn't say immigration only, it's more nationalism in terms of making sure that Australia is first in terms of a lot of the policies that are happening. And immigration would be one of those issues. So I shouldn't just say the National Party is only about immigration. It is about focusing on Australia and making sure that the laws that are passed are really focused on Australia first. It's kind of like make Australia great again. You can almost say it like that. But that's not to get into politics or anything. But their goal is, hey, we should put Australia first in what we did. All right? National Party and Liberal Party, they tend to work together. In fact, if you look at the coalition government, because remember, you can win in a parliamentary democracy, and by now you know that if the video cuts like that, I probably had to sneeze, which is exactly what I had to do. Now, if you remember, in a parliamentary democracy, you can win with a plurality of the vote. So that means, hey, we got the most votes, but we still don't have over 50% of the seats in the House of Representatives in this case. But remember what we said, what you can do is if you realize, well, we don't have over 50% of the seats, you can partner with another political party and form a coalition government to get you over that number. So the Liberal Party in the last election, they are partnered with the National Party. And so together they have, I believe it's one seat over 50%, one seat over the majority that they need. So National Party and Liberal Party working together. Scott Morrison is a member of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party needs the National Party to get over 50%. That leaves the Labour Party as the opposition party, the second place party that is opposed to the winners. Voting in Australia. Now, this is common. A lot of places you have to be 18 in order to vote. So in Australia, a citizen must be 18 to vote. But here's something different that Australia does. And this is a debate among democracies around the world. I would say, if I remember when I did the research, it's about 22 countries, thereabouts, who have mandatory voting. And Australia is one of those countries. So in Australia, all citizens have to vote. Once you turn 18, so again, 18 and over, that's the eligible age to vote, so you have to be at least 18. In Australia, all citizens have to vote or else they must pay a fine. So the fine's about 20 Australian dollars. But everyone has to vote or else you have to pay the fine. And there's this debate that kind of goes back and forth between democracies. So there's the philosophy that democracies like the United States have. And our philosophy is, yes, we are a democracy. Voting is a freedom that people have. But because it's a freedom, people also have the freedom not to do it. And so we can't give someone a freedom on the other hand and then force them to do it. That would no longer be a freedom. That would be the kind of the philosophy of the United States. The philosophy of Australia would be, yes, voting is a freedom, but it's also a responsibility. And because the people who run the country are elected by the citizens have to participate. If they're going to be citizens, it is their responsibility to participate because they are the ones that choose the leaders. The leaders have to be chosen by them. So, on one hand, you have what would be countries like the United States. Freedom also means freedom to do something also means the freedom not to do something. And if you force people, it's no longer freedom. In Australia, they would argue it's freedom, but it's also responsibility because so much depends on the citizens. If you're going to be a citizen, it is your freedom and your responsibility to do, in this case, to vote. So it's interesting. It's actually an interesting debate to listen to both sides. I'm not saying one side's right, one side's wrong on this, but it's interesting to see how each side kind of views that issue. We'll come back to that in a second. Australia is a Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, just like we talked about the United Kingdom, just like we talked about Canada being a Commonwealth. So Australia rules itself, and yet they have close relationship with the British. I'm pretty sure everyone in Australia will love for me to point out that Australia has won more cricket World Cups than any other country, including England, which is where cricket has come from, where cricket came from. Not to mention, Australia is also very good at rugby. Now, all that to say, and of course rugby also comes from the United Kingdom as well. All that to say, Australia rules itself, not that rugby and cricket are important to this, but they also have these really, especially with the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, they have this really close bond in terms of trade and defense. And Australia knows if they're attacked, the United Kingdom will come to their aid because they are a Commonwealth of the United Kingdom. So, kind of awesome, kind of interesting. Interesting the way that works, same thing with Canada, but it works well. That British Empire, even though there's no British Empire anymore, the relationships that developed because of the British Empire and how extensive it was, you still see it in today's world. So I think it's kind of awesome just to look at. Right, by the way, I have students who always ask, so this is a kangaroo on one side, this is an emu. An emu is a flightless bird. It's like an ostrich except smaller. So kangaroo and emu. Now, for you guys, your assignment is this. We're only going to have one assignment. We're going to make it pretty simple because you've been doing so much work before this video. With Australia and the fact that they have mandatory voting, meaning you have to vote, what would actually be called compulsory voting. Here's a question. Do you like the idea that the US has, which is voting is a freedom, but you also have the freedom not to do it, and I can't force you to do something because then it's no longer a freedom? Do you think that's the right way to have voting, or do you believe Australia's way, which is voting is a freedom, but it's also a responsibility, and since all the leaders are elected by the citizens need to participate in the democracy in order for it to function well? Which one do you think is the right way to do voting in a democracy? I want you to type that up. Whatever way you choose, explain why you think that's the right way. That's all I want. Just a couple sentences explaining why you think either the way the US does things or the way Australia does things is the correct way. Okay? Submit that to me. Let me know if you have any questions in conference. All right? Take care, guys. And remember, tie yourself to the mast like Odysseus, ignore the siren song of summer, and power your way through to the end. Okay, guys? Take care.